Nobody in the classroom expected the quiet girl in the last row to humiliate the teacher, especially not the teacher himself. When Malcolm Reed slammed the marker onto the tray and laughed at her in front of the entire class, he thought the moment would end the way it always did. Another smart student embarrassed into silence. Another warning to everyone else about who controlled the room. But 30 seconds later, the entire class was staring at the whiteboard in complete silence. Because the equation Malcolm Reed had struggled with for 20 minutes had just been solved perfectly by the one student he claimed didn't belong there. And for the first time in years, the man who controlled everything at Westbridge Academy looked afraid. Lena Brooks sat near the back corner of advanced calculus, exactly where she always sat. Not because she wanted to disappear, but because she'd learned long ago that attention at Westbridge usually came with consequences. Morning sunlight spilled across the classroom windows, cutting bright lines over rows of polished desks. The air smelled like dry erase markers and old textbooks. Somewhere near the front, somebody tapped a pencil nervously against a calculator. Mr. Reed stood beside the whiteboard with his sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows. Tall, perfect posture, the kind of teacher parents loved instantly. Students feared him for the same reason. He had a way of making humiliation sound intellectual. "You'd think," he said while circling part of the equation, "that after 3 weeks of review, somebody in this room would finally understand basic integration." A few students laughed automatically. Lena kept her eyes on her notebook. She already solved the problem 10 minutes ago. Every line, every derivative, every coefficient. But experience told her not to volunteer unless absolutely necessary. Mr. Reed capped the marker dramatically and turned toward the room. "All right," he announced, "who wants to solve it?" Several students avoided eye contact instantly. Lena hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. The room changed immediately. She noticed the look exchanged between two girls near the front. One whispered something. Another smirked. Mr. Reed's eye landed on Lena for half a second before sliding past her. "Anybody else?" he asked casually. More silence. Lena kept her hand raised. His jaw tightened slightly. Finally, he sighed, as though deeply inconvenienced. "Well," he said, "I suppose confidence deserves an opportunity." A couple students chuckled. "Come on up, Miss Brooks. Let's see what internet shortcut you memorized last night." Heat crawled up Lena's neck, but she stood anyway. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the tile floor as she walked to the board. Mr. Reed handed her the marker like he expected her to fail. She uncapped it calmly, then began writing. The classroom slowly fell silent. One line became two. Two became four. Every step flowed smoothly into the next. No hesitation. No guessing. No corrections. By the time Lena boxed the final answer, even the students who disliked her were staring openly. Mr. Reed stopped smiling. The answer was perfect. Not close. Perfect. Lena stepped back and handed him the marker. For 3 long seconds, he simply stared at the board. Then came the excuse. "You clearly saw this somewhere before class." His tone sharpened. Memorizing procedures isn't the same thing as understanding them. A few students shifted uncomfortably, because everyone in the room knew what had just happened. He'd challenged her publicly, and lost publicly. Lena returned quietly to her seat, but she could feel eyes following her now. Not mocking anymore. Watching. Mr. Reed erased the board harder than necessary. The marker squealed against the surface. "Moving on," he muttered. But the energy in the classroom had changed. And he knew it. The bell rang 40 minutes later. Students flooded into the hallway in loud clusters. Lena packed slowly, hopping to avoid attention. "Miss Brooks." She froze. Mr. Reed sat behind his desk, writing on a yellow slip. Without looking up, he held it out. "Detention, today after school." Lena blinked. "For what?" "Disruptive conduct." She stared at him in disbelief. "I answered the problem you asked us to solve." His expression remained perfectly calm. "Your attitude was argumentative and disrespectful." "That's not true." Now he looked up. Cold blue eyes behind thin-framed glasses. "Be careful," he said softly. "You're already walking a fine line in this class." The threat sat heavy in the air. Lena took the detention slip silently and walked out before he could see her hands shaking. By the time she got home, dusk had settled over the neighborhood. Their small duplex smelled like onions and garlic from the kitchen. Her mother, Denise, stood at the stove, still wearing dark blue nursing scrubs from her hospital shift. "You're late," she said without turning around. Then she noticed Lena's face. "What happened?" Lena dropped her backpack beside the table. "Mr. Reed gave me detention." Denise turned immediately. "You." Lena explained everything. The equation, the comments, the detention. By the end, Denise looked furious. "He punished you for answering correctly." Lena gave a bitter laugh. "Apparently, I embarrassed him." Denise leaned against the counter slowly. "That man been teaching there almost 15 years, she murmured. "I've heard stories." "What kind of stories?" Her mother hesitated. "The kind people whisper about but never report." The next morning detention felt colder than usual. Dust floated through pale sunlight, while Lena worked quietly through practice problems at an empty desk. Outside the room, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Then laughter. Brittany Cole, head cheerleader, straight-A student, principal's favorite. Lena recognized her voice instantly. "Oh my God," Brittany laughed loudly. "Mr. Reed literally fixes everything for me." More giggling followed. "He said not to stress about the test because he'd help me out." Lena's pencil stopped moving. Outside the door, an old janitor slowly pushed a mop bucket down the hallway. His name was Arthur. Most students barely noticed him. But Lena did. Because Arthur noticed everything. As he passed the doorway, his eyes met hers briefly. There was something knowing in that look. Something tired. The warning bell rang moments later. Lena headed toward calculus with a knot growing in her stomach. Inside class, Mr. Reed stood beside a stack of graded quizzes. "Some of you performed adequately," he announced. Then he smiled toward Brittany. "Miss Cole, perhaps you'd like to explain problem 4. Brittany stared blankly at the page. You divide first." "Not quite," Mr. Reed said gently. Lena nearly laughed from disbelief. Gentle. She'd never once heard him speak to her that way. Brittany guessed 3 more wrong answers. Each one earned patience. Encouragement. Hints. Meanwhile, Lena sat silently, with both hands folded beneath her desk. After class, she deliberately stayed behind pretending to organize papers in her backpack. That was when she heard it. "About your score," Mr. Reed whispered. Brittany lowered her voice dramatically. "I know I totally messed up." "It's fine," he replied. "Stop by later and we'll adjust things." Lena's chest tightened instantly. Adjust things. She stayed hidden behind another desk until Brittany left. Her heart pounded all through lunch. By afternoon, she found herself outside Principal Whitmore's office. The secretary barely glanced up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." "Well, he's busy." I need to report something important. 10 minutes later, Lena sat across from Principal Whitmore inside a spotless office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. The principal listened without expression as she explained everything. The quiz, the comments, the suspicious conversation. When she finished, silence filled the room. Finally, he folded his hands carefully. Mr. Reed is one of our most respected faculty members. I understand, but I think, Whitmore interrupted smoothly, you should be very careful before making accusations you cannot prove. Lena stared at him. So nothing's going to happen. I didn't say that. But you don't believe me. The principal smiled thinly. I believe misunderstandings happen often at your age. That was the moment Lena understood something important. Nobody was coming to help her. That night she started documenting everything. Dates, comments, grade changes, every interaction. She hid the notebook beneath her mattress before sleeping. 3 days later, her calculus grade dropped from a 94 to a 78 overnight. No explanation. No marked deductions. Just changed. Lena stared at the computer screen in shock before instinct kicked in. Screenshots. Timestamps. Backup copies emailed to herself immediately. By first period, the online portal mysteriously went into scheduled maintenance. When it returned, the original grade had vanished completely. But Lena already had proof. And for the first time, fear began turning into anger. Weeks passed. The hostility escalated quietly. Mr. Reed stopped calling on her entirely. Then he started making comments. Some students should focus less on proving themselves and more on understanding their limitations. Or, raw talent only takes people so far. Every remark came with that same subtle glance toward Lena. Enough to wound. Never enough to report successfully. One afternoon, he solved a problem incorrectly on the board. Lena hesitated, then spoke up carefully. The negative coefficient changes the entire result. Silence. Mr. Reed turned slowly. You're interrupting instruction again. I was just trying to help. No, he snapped. You were trying to undermine me. The room went dead quiet. Then came the sentence that stayed with her for weeks. You people always think intelligence excuses arrogance. The words hit harder than yelling ever could. Lena sat frozen. Several students looked horrified. Others looked down instantly. Mr. Reed realized too late what he'd said aloud. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. Another interruption, and you'll spend the month in detention. That night, Denise nearly drove to the school herself. Instead, she helped Lena download a recording app. From now on, her mother said quietly, we collect evidence. So Lena did. Audio recordings, screenshots, witness names, patterns, and eventually she found someone willing to help. Marcus Hill, former honor student, expelled senior. Marcus met her behind the football field one evening, while cold autumn wind rattled metal bleachers nearby. They did the same thing to me, he admitted quietly. Reed accused me of plagiarism after I challenged one of his grading decisions. What happened? Marcus laughed bitterly. No proof, no support. Principal backed him completely. He showed Lena how to secure files online, how to preserve metadata, how to create protected backups. Because if they realize what you're doing, he warned, they'll try to erase everything. And eventually they did. After Lena won first place at the regional mathematics competition, the school accused her of cheating. Anonymous reports, suspicious timing, claims that her score was statistically improbable. They suspended her pending investigation less than 24 hours after her victory. Mr. Reed sat in the hearing pretending disappointment. Principal Whitmore called it deeply concerning. Lena almost broke that day. Almost. Until Arthur found her alone in the hallway afterward. The old janitor glanced around carefully before slipping her a flash drive. "Security backup system," he whispered. "They forgot it still records." Lena watched the footage that night with trembling hands. There it was. Brittany entering the math office after hours. Mr. Reed unlocking exam cabinets. Photos of answer keys. Test packets. Dozens of students over multiple semesters. Everything. Arthur had unknowingly recorded years of cheating. And suddenly, the entire system began collapsing. Within 48 hours, the footage reached attorneys. Then reporters. Then parents. Students walked out of class carrying protest signs across the front lawn. News vans lined the street outside Westbridge Academy. Former students came forward one after another. Stories matched perfectly. Manipulated grades. Targeted punishments. Selective favoritism. Racial bias. Retaliation. The school board held an emergency hearing inside a packed auditorium. Mr. Reed denied everything until the footage played publicly on a projector screen. Then he stopped talking altogether. Principal Whitmore tried blaming policy. That failed too. By sunset, both men were suspended, pending criminal investigation. 2 weeks later, they were fired permanently. The district restored Lena's academic record completely. Her scholarship offers returned. The math championship reinstated her title officially. But the moment that mattered most came months later at graduation. Because when Lena Brooks walked across that stage in a white graduation gown, the audience rose to its feet before her name was even finished being announced. Teachers applauded. Parents cried. Arthur stood proudly near the back beside Marcus. And for the first time since entering Westbridge Academy, Lena no longer felt invisible. Principal Harper, the new principal brought in after the scandal, handed her diploma with shaking emotion. "You changed this school," she whispered. Lena looked out across the auditorium. At her exhausted mother crying openly in the front row. At students who no longer looked afraid. At cameras documenting a moment nobody thought possible 1 year earlier. Then she smiled softly and accepted the diploma. Not because she had won, but because they failed to erase her. And in the end, that mattered more than every trophy combined.